You're listening to The Range, Gardner-Webb University streaming and on-demand programming. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Jeff Powell. Dr. Elizabeth Amato is in the studio, as she is each and every week, to talk about, well, just crazy stuff these days. It's politics, of course, but so much is happening. It is so hard to keep up.
Right. It is just an onslaught. You wake up in the morning and, you check your cell phone and you're like, what else has happened?
Yeah. As we sit down to record this, it's like 14 days in office, two weeks.
Yeah.
And, Donald Trump promised he would be a man of action.
Oh, and he has not disappointed on that count.
It has been constant. It has.
Yes.
It's so much so
I could do with a little, apathy.
You need some time to digest, I think.
Maybe he should go golfing.
Well, his predecessor did a lot of that,
right.
I understand. Yes. Want to focus today on three things, and very interesting, as we've been doing this through the campaign season and now into the new administration. We did this through the transition period. I never felt compelled that right before we went on the air or sit down to record, to check the news to make sure nothing happened.
Right.
I check the news just to make sure nothing big had happened.
Oh, I do too. I understand completely. It's a constant. I woke up this morning. Australia was upset.
Australia's upset. Specifically, the Prime Minister of Australia is upset.
Apparently, just very briefly, the Prime Minister of Australia and Trump were to speak for about an hour on the phone, and it was supposed to be a fluff conversation. Instead, apparently, it descended in the 25 minutes in which Trump started bragging about his electoral victory and some such agreement we have with Australia about taking refugees from islands in Oceania. So it descended quickly.
Yes. And Cordy, maybe or maybe not, Donald Trump hung up on the Prime Minister of Australia.
It's unclear what precisely happened there.
But the call was cut short. It did not last the full hour.
Definitely cut short.
But what I want to really focus on today, three things that have been making a lot of news lately. First of all, the so-called travel ban.
Sure.
Which may or may not be a travel ban, but we'll get into that. The other thing I want to talk about is the firing of the acting Attorney General. And then the third thing is the just announced on Tuesday night, the Supreme Court nominee.
Sure.
Because that was a big part of the campaign.
That's right. And that's been an ongoing issue for probably the last 10 or 9 months. I forget precisely.
I think Scalia died in February of last year. So it's been a year.
This has been a year. Yeah. The Supreme Court's been 8 members.
And of course, since we're there, we'll stay there. We'll discuss this one first. Scalia passes away unexpectedly. President Obama is expected to put forth a nominee. He does. It becomes very clear early on that the Republicans are going to not move on this at all.
Right.
Elaborate.
Yeah. In fact, if I may, I could have my memory could be mistaken, but I actually think Republicans, even before he had made his nominee, had already said that they were not going to nominate or confirm whoever Obama nominated.
They said that we would leave it up to the election.
Right, we were going to leave it up to the election, and this was a huge risk of Mitch McConnell's. I mean, just absolutely huge risk. He was banking a lot of his career on this paying out. And things were looking very vague during the election because for a long time, as you know, everybody thought Hillary Clinton was going to win. And so it was becoming an issue. Should we just confirm Merrick Garland, who was Obama's nominee? Do we wait for whoever Hillary's nominee would be? None of that happened.
Yeah.
So now Republicans are faced with the prospect of actually confirming Trump's nominee. His name is Gorsuch. And he is currently, I think, a judge in the district or one of the federal courts. Right. There's 3 levels of federal courts. Mm-hmm. He's either a circuit court or he's a district court. Mm-hmm. But at any rate, he has been nominated up to the Supreme Court. He is regarded as has a kind of kinship or a sympathetic sort of reading of the Constitution, similar to Scalia's, an originalist, a textualist. Scalia
which for those of us who aren't in your class.
Oh, yes, there we go.
That means.
Yes. Well, Scalia wrote very prolifically on what he meant by this as well. But for Scalia, the job of a judge is not to determine what type of policy he or she would like to have, or to determine what would be the best possible outcome to this case, but to apply the law. And the application of the law means you got to go back to the text. You got to go back to the words written on the page, and you have to see what was the original meaning of this? What was the original purpose of this law? And then, to the best of your ability as a judge, you apply that law to the given circumstance. And the way Scalia put it is that, if you are not sometimes unhappy with how you are ruling, then you're not doing your job correctly. In fact, that was sort of Scalia's point, right? Mm-hmm. You are meant not to be imposing your own values, but you are meant to be taking whatever the law as it was written and applying it to the given circumstances. So you should sometimes be personally unhappy with the way you're ruling.
Yeah. This was such a big issue during the campaign because, as you say, the Republicans said, let's let the people choose in the ballot box. And many people who voted either for or against Donald Trump or for or against Hillary Clinton based it on this idea of who the Supreme Court nominee would be, because it's in the balance, right? It's at that tipping point. This person, if they are more liberal or more conservative, is going to tip the balance of the court.
Yeah, and this has been a very interesting phenomenon in sort of American political life, that people now vote for the president as a proxy for who they want on the Supreme Court. And that is unheard of 100 years ago. So this has been a relatively recent phenomenon, I'd say probably since the 70s. Specifically, it is Roe v. Wade that is driving all this. Let's actually just put that one on the table. Let me just give a little bit more context here. The Supreme Court has about 80% of the time, they rule unanimously. They all rule together. So most of the time, the Supreme Court is in complete agreement about what should be done in this case. But nobody cares about those cases. The average American does not think about those cases. The average American doesn't even think about things like free speech. They don't even really think about things like usually due process of law or criminal procedure cases. What they're really thinking about are those wedge issues that, drive our culture. And that's abortion. It has been gay marriage. That issue has kind of passed on, though. But there are other potential issues that will be as divisive. Religious liberty is picking up steam. And I'd also say on the horizon, I see more issues with euthanasia coming up, especially given a lot of the measures that passed in the ballot box in Colorado and other states this past year. We're going to see more challenges to that. And
so this is important because whoever ends up filling the vacant seat could be there for 20, 30, 40 years.
Easily, yeah. I think the longest judge served for 37 years. But, judges are living longer nowadays. And Gorsuch is a relatively young man, and that's intentional, right? Because they are there for life. It is possible to impeach a justice, but nobody has done it since Thomas Jefferson tried in 1803.
Wow.
It didn't work for Thomas Jefferson, so the judge was technically impeached, but was not removed from office because it's always that two-step process. And Jefferson was doing it for pretty clear political reasons. So, and that's always been the risk, is that justices need to be able to do their job without risk of political pressure or losing their position. That's why they are. You can't remove them. Sometimes they retire, though. That does happen.
Now, the interesting thing is now the Democratic Party is in the reverse position they would have been in, of course, if Hillary had won.
Sure.
On the surface, you would say Donald Trump has majorities in the House and the Senate. It should go through. But as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, to get the nomination to pass or secured, he needs 8 Democratic votes. Is that correct?
Yes.
Somebody's got to cross party lines.
Yeah. Because you don't want this to be filibustered. That's what the issue is.
Filibuster.
That filibuster. Yeah, the filibuster is
proof.
The idea that you need. Normally to get a vote passed, the way we think about it is you need 50% of the vote, right? Or 50%, 51%, right? You win.
Right.
And that is normally how things work. In the Senate, there is a mechanism called the filibuster by which a single senator has the power to hold the whole thing up.
Right.
Basically, he just starts talking and does not stop. That's where you hear these stories of senators and they're reading Green Eggs and Ham.
Right.
I think Ted Cruz did that, or they start reading the Constitution. There's that wonderful famous scene in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington where Jimmy Stewart is with a crackly voice, filibustering in the Senate over some all-important, political issue. And so to overcome a filibuster, the Senate can shut that down, but they need 60 votes to do it. So that's why you'd have to have those 8 Democrats to vote with Republicans.
Now, there's some way around that, though, right? Called the nuclear option?
Yes, the nuclear option is where the Supreme Court, or not Supreme Court, my goodness, I'm switching things up. That is when the Senate uses a procedural law to kind of ram it through on a simple majority. And the reason why I'm being vague is the procedure that they use is complicated and weird. And what it would do is it would enable the Senate to say, we're going to do this on a simple majority and filibusters are not allowed.
Okay. So it's just manipulating the rules in such a way that you can get it through without the filibusters. But, the Democratic Party is faced with this idea. They, for years, said the Republicans were just the party of no, just obstructionist in anything that was trying to be passed. And specifically, if we're talking about the Supreme Court, President Obama did put forth a nominee, and the Republicans just would not move on.
Yeah, they didn't even look at it. Yeah, the Senate just shut it down.
And so I guess the thing now is the Democrats are faced with, are we going to use every procedural maneuver we can to delay or obstruct, or are we going to sit down and have this hearing?
Right.
And that's a big question for the Democratic Party.
Right. And right now what it looks like is they're going to obstruct by whatever procedural means necessary. And I think this is going to backfire on them. I think that Democrats should be more strategic. There are a lot of Trump nominees coming down the pike. Everything from Secretary of the State, all of those positions, all of the other federal judges. They should decide where are we going to plant our flag? Who do we really not want to be confirmed? And I think they should allow some through because, that's just the nature of things, right? Presidents appoint whom they want. At some point, the Senate's got to confirm somebody. So I really think that they should be more strategic in this. If I were in the Senate and I were a Senate Democrat, I would let this Supreme Court nominee go, mainly because I really do think that this position in particular will backfire. Americans pay attention to Supreme Court nominations, and so I think it would just make you look bad, unless you're really from that district where you've got a safe seat. But I still think that the Democratic Party then, if you're calling negative attention, even the party itself within the Senate might try and shut you down. I really think that this would not be the place to make that stand. I think that if a Democrat wanted to really resist on another nominee for another federal position within the executive branch, I think that would be a much better use of their time.
Gotcha. Now, this is important, as we said, because the conservative versus liberal wings of the Supreme Court are kind of right at that tipping point, and this appointment will tip the scales one way or the other.
Yeah.
But many of the other Supreme Court justices are pretty advanced in age, so we're looking at a very good possibility this is not the last Supreme Court nominee that President Trump will make.
Yeah, it's likely one of them might drop dead.
Yeah, or decide they can retire.
That's right. It's a more elegant way of putting it. But, if you look at the numbers, they don't retire.
Yeah.
Oh, no. They cling onto their seats. It's for life. And many of them, especially if you are one of those more liberal justices, from your perspective.
Then you're not leaving.
You're not leaving because you would be opening up that seat. The only reason you would do it potentially is for health reasons or if there really was no other option you thought. But yeah, it is likely that Trump in the next 4 years could have the opportunity of filling yet a second position. That would be interesting, and What we'd have to know then is what the composition of the Senate would be. So if he were to fill a second position, would it be before or after the midterm election? Because the composition of the Senate could change.
Yeah.
And if Democrats picked up any seats, or even if the midterm election revealed pushback on some of Trump's policies in general, this might cause Trump to choose somebody to be more sympathetic to the left, maybe a little bit more of a moderate candidate.
Gotcha. So I hadn't thought about that. It's not that if you're a liberal-leaning Supreme Court justice that you're thinking I must hold on for 4 to 8 years. It may only be 2.
Yeah, it may only be 2, right? Because if you're I'm just going to pick on poor Justice Ginsburg. But I think she is the eldest member of the court in terms of years, not seniority. And she may be thinking, if I want to retire, which she might choose to stay on for 2 more years then.
We'll close this segment with it. I just heard this morning and was kind of surprised by this, that if Gorsuch is approved and takes his seat, he will be the only Protestant currently serving on the Supreme Court. And
I did not realize
I found that very interesting.
Yes, the Supreme Court in recent years has become filled with Jews and Catholics, which is an interesting thing to think about. But the Supreme Court, just as a historical note, has always been more open to other religions, more so than maybe Congress or even our executive branch. So, for example, the first Jewish member of the Supreme Court was Brandeis, and his appointment was in the early 20th century. It would be quite some time before you'd have a Jew actually serve in Congress.
Okay, interesting. Just an interesting little tidbit
there.
Yeah,
it is.
So let's move on to our second topic, which will be the firing of the acting attorney general.
Yes.
Let's talk about what preceded the firing, why it happened, and maybe put it in its historical context.
Sure. Well, this has to do with, and I believe this was last Friday, Trump announced very suddenly that there would be a ban. And I'm going to continue to use the word ban because I don't think that it is a temporary ban. That's fine. But even temporary bans are bans.
Right.
Or temporary embargoes or whatever particular phrase. But a ban on refugees coming from, I think it is 7 countries. They're all in the Middle East. They're all Muslim majority. And Syria, however, I think is 120 days, or it's just on hold indefinitely. But for all the other countries, it's a 90-day ban. And this happened extremely suddenly. Trump, everybody agrees, this was not well planned, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
Trump,
the rollout had some issues.
The rollout had a lot of issues. It caused problems for people with green cards. It caused problems with people who had legitimate visas. There was just a lot of there was not good communication through all the branches and then through the people, of course, in the airports that were ultimately going to be applying these. So people's lives were inconvenienced, and that happened. Now, many people are extremely angry about this ban to begin with.
Oh, we've seen massive protests.
Massive protests, yes. People have voluntarily gone to the airports and actually parked in there, just to protest with placards. Yeah. I have to say that's a bridge too far for me. I don't go to the airport unless I have to.
You have to go to the airport. Gotcha.
But yes, they've been protesting, arguing that this is un-American, that this is just not in line with our values as a nation, that this is picking on Muslims in particular, that this is simply bad policy, and we should not be doing it, that we're dividing families. I mean, I've heard stories of, families have come to the United States from Syria, and grandma, who really, needs to come as well, has been left. Families have been divided and whatnot. So there's a lot of people who are just really disturbed and bothered that this is simply not appropriate.
So how does that play in with the acting attorney general?
Right. Well, the acting attorney general, Sally Yates, decided she wasn't actually going to enforce it. And she was very...
She doesn't really have that liberty to do,
yeah,
though,
she really
does she?
doesn't. regardless of how you stand on this position, you can certainly say that you think this ban is wrong, that it should not, be enforced. But the Attorney General does not have that discretion. And this has to do with the structure of the executive branch. The Attorney General is a position within the executive branch, is a subordinate to the president. And there's two types of subordinates in the executive branch. There are subordinates that Trump can't do anything about. They're civil servants.
Right.
They're like people, who have mid-level management jobs. Trump can't do anything about them. He could walk up to them and, yell you're fired all day and nothing would happen and they just stare back with, so what?
Yeah.
That's the solid bureaucracy. But then we have political positions, and that is actually, or these are the other types of subordinates, and that's what the Attorney Generals. Those people have no real discretion about what they will and won't enforce. If she does have the discretion, I should say, that if it was clearly unconstitutional, she could refuse to do it, and if she really thought it were wrong, she always has the option of stepping down. Now, those are radical moves. But in this instance, it's not clearly unconstitutional. People disagree. The courts are still talking about it. If you go and you dig up what reporters and other experts have said, nobody's really too sure. But there seems to be pretty good precedent. As we know, Obama has also had temporary halts and bans on issuing visas and whatnot. This is a pretty common practice. So Trump has pretty good constitutional ground for what he's doing. He has the authority to do it, and his subordinate, the Attorney General, has no real discretion to say no. And so he was well within his power to fire her. And notice how whenever we look at this, people may be upset that she was fired. They may be, calling her a hero, whatever. But nobody can really make the argument that he doesn't have that power because he clearly does.
I did hear in the media a couple of references to Nixon's Saturday Night Massacre.
Yeah.
I don't know that they're the same thing.
I don't think they are. And I understand why people would want to make that comparison. But in my analysis, I don't think that's the same. Nixon was very clearly firing people who were investigating him.
Right.
That was him protecting that was him trying to shield himself, basically, right? Trump is more clearly firing somebody who is insubordinate, and the executive branch is very hierarchical in that. Like, again, it's the president. If you dig up your copy of the Constitution, you turn to Article 2 and you read that first sentence is, the executive power of the United States shall be vested in a president. Every little ounce of executive power the United States has belongs to the president. Vice president has nothing.
Right.
So if you're in the executive branch, your job is to, follow
your orders.
Follow your orders. Now, as a nation, we value deliberation and debate, but that happens in three places. That happens in Congress, that happens on the Supreme Court, and that happens among the three branches. But the executive branch is unique because while any good president should want advice and should try and deliberate with his subordinates, it's always a deliberation of unequals. The president gets to make the final decision, and if the president chooses to go against the advice of his subordinates or his advisors, he is constitutionally empowered to do so.
Okay. And all of this, of course, she was acting
Yeah,
Attorney
acting,
General,
sure.
so she knew she didn't have a whole lot to lose there.
She kind of did. Yeah.
Jeff Sessions
Sure.
is going to be the next
Right.
Attorney General.
Yeah. And has that appointment actually gone through? I must
I
say, I'm a
think
little fuzzy on that.
It did just a few hours ago, actually. So, yes.
Because I remember
Fast breaking news.
I think it was on Tuesday or even Monday that they were having his nomination hearings and such like that. Yeah, so I think it did go through.
I think it has. I don't think he's been sworn in yet.
No, I don't think he's been sworn in as well yet. So and that's another good point to bring up. Yates was acting. She kind of knew she was on her way out. And while I just said she constitutionally didn't really have the power to do what she did, it might be a good career move, right?
Right.
I mean, honestly, let's just put that one out there, right? She has now has higher name recognition. If she wants to advance within the Democratic Party ranks or other political ranks, she just got an awful lot of name recognition and a lot of heroism.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably true. We talked about we were going to talk about the Attorney General, but we were also going to talk about the travel ban. I think we've kind of done that.
Yeah, I think we kind of did. I think they were kind of related. But if
we
there
got
were
2 for
other
1 there.
thoughts that we didn't cover everything, was there any other thoughts we should
Well,
do on that?
I think it's interesting to note that the travel ban was not. I think in the popular media and in other countries, it's playing out that there's been a ban on all Muslim immigration into the United States. There haven't. It's 7 countries.
7 countries. Yeah.
They are not the most populous Muslim countries.
Sure.
There are places where there is a lot of disorder, civil strife, war, terrorist breeding grounds.
Yeah.
And as you've said, other people have restricted immigration from these places
it's extremely
before.
commonplace. Like this is one reason why this is left. And this is why Trump it's temporary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Presidents have discretion, and this is with congressional authorization, right? If you dig up your copy of the Constitution again, you will note Congress has the power to set naturalization laws and whatnot. That's of course becoming citizens. Presidents, though, refugees are in odd status.
Mm-hmm.
They're not real immigrants. And what I mean by that is immigrants are people who are like, I want to move here and I want to live here and be a citizen. Refugees are people who are fleeing some evil in their homeland.
Mm-hmm.
So they are not necessarily, excited about moving. They usually love their homelands. They may be forced to always have left their homelands, but they are not the same sort of class of people. So presidents have a lot of discretion, and since it's temporary, Congress has granted the president discretion to make temporary bans. And so Trump is exercising that discretion, which, again, people are free to dislike, think he's not using that discretion well, but he is within his constitutional authority.
I do think one of the questions that the courts are going to have to deal with is critics say it's a ban based on religion.
Right.
And I think Trump supporters would argue that, no, it's based on origin.
Country of origin, yes. And that would be the smartest argument. I think that, because obviously this waiting period, this temporary ban will be up. Whenever Trump replaces it with, and I think that's really what people who are upset should focus on, is thinking about what will this be replaced with? What will that look like? At that point, if Trump does put in some sort of, religious test or qualification, that would then give you much better grounds for arguing for some sort of, unconstitutionality or some sort of discrimination.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that covers the 3 topics. Dr. Elizabeth Amato,
Thank you.
political science professor here at Gardner Webb. If you have any questions or comments for us, just email us info@wgwg.org.